Jesus is the answer to many of America's social problems.
But it's not that simple.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, Mark, and I am also very glad you've joined us for today's program. This is an interesting discussion. I'm sure you tuned in, and this is not the first time for most of you, but you've tuned in to hear a good discussion, and I promise there's going to be one around the table today. Now, I'd like for the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
My name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. And I'm an Assemblies of God minister.
I'm Tom PLUMBLEY. I'm the Senior Minister at First Christian Church in beautiful downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
My name is Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I'm Tony Mathews, and I serve as pastor of North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. Welcome back to the program. All of you have been here before. Glad you've taken more time off from what you normally do to be here for this discussion. And a special welcome to you. We're so glad you've tuned in for today's program. Let's get right to our discussion. Recently, Melissa Langsam Bronstein, a former U.S. Department of State speechwriter and a senior contributor to The Federalist, wrote an article entitled, "I'm an Observant Jew. Here's why I want more Americans to come to Jesus." Well, such a title may sound surprising, but she argues that America needs a 21st century Great Awakening. She notes that while, quote, "it is possible to be a good person without traditional religion, it's hard not to notice that human suffering has increased as rates of religious affiliation have fallen," close quote. She cites data regarding the rise of the nones, those who don't claim any religion, increasing loneliness, especially among the young, increased deaths from suicide, and the opioid epidemic, the many fatherless homes, increasing poverty, and a host of other societal ills. At the same time, she points to Kanye West's album, Jesus the King, as providing a powerful case for a personal relationship with God. In light of her arguments, we would like our panelists to consider these following questions. First of all, do you believe that Ms. Bronstein has made an adequate case for those who have left traditional religion, or the nones, to return to church? Another question, in what ways might the teachings of Jesus help Americans to resolve the many social issues they face? And then finally, this question, would America benefit from a national Christian spiritual revival at this point in history? That's our subject for today. Again, we're so glad you've joined us. We're going to get back to our discussion now. You've heard some of the opening statements. Let's go back to Dr. Robeck. You made the opening statement. You believe that Jesus would solve many of America's social problems.
I'm not sure that he would solve any American social problems. I think that if we follow the teachings of Jesus, if we do what Jesus did, then I think we have a chance of solving an enormous number of American problems. You know, it is interesting that really at the beginning of the 20th century, with the kind of expansion of liberalism in the American church on the whole, there was a book that came out, and the question that the book asked was, what would Jesus do? Okay? Jesus says that we're to love our neighbor. And that has huge implications if we take it seriously. That one little command to love your neighbor has huge implications for how we deal with homelessness, how we deal with racism, how we deal with sexuality, how we deal with a variety of issues that face us as a nation. I think it's very simplistic, as you have pointed out, Dr. Luxton, that we would simply say Jesus is the answer. I remember in the 60s and 70s that was often said by young people, and then others started raising the question, yeah, but what is the question? You know, are we talking past one another and so forth? I think there are lots of questions that we could apply the life and teachings of Jesus to that would be extremely helpful in our current situation. I mean, others would include environmental issues, or how do we address poverty? And I don't mean simply by saying, okay, we need another government program or we need a church program, but what am I going to do about people that are poor? What am I going to do about racism and so forth? I have the ability to grant civil rights, human rights, in my context, to anybody I want to. I have a lot of power. If I follow the teachings of Jesus, I think that could be really important in the way our society could move forward.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Luxton, you did say it's a complex issue. It's not
Yes,
that simple.
yes, and I want to start by making clear that I do believe that belief in Jesus and having a relationship with Jesus makes a huge difference in the way we live our lives and the decisions that we make. And if there were more people that had that, would that help us? Absolutely. Would it make a difference in society? Absolutely. So I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. But I'm just looking at where we are now and the complexity of dealing with it, and how do you bring Jesus back into the dynamics, into the conversation in a way that it's heard. You know, my background is Europe, and you know, Europe is a number of years, I'd say, ahead of the United States in its move, in its march almost away from not just organized religion, but the concept of a Jesus that makes a difference, into a very secularized environment. And I think that it's not just organized religion, because in organized religion we have used the name of Jesus in perpetuating some things, frankly, that have been wrong in society, and that does not help. So when we actually talk about making a difference and a revival and bringing Jesus back into the dimension, I think it's a very, very difficult challenge. I'm not convinced that the old age of large mega church evangelism is going to do it. It's going to make a difference. I think today's generation, tech, social media, individual connection, that's the way that it makes a difference. It's very, very hard to have something that has that same widespread impact through that means. So would it make a difference? Absolutely. But how does one enable that to happen, I think is a totally different challenge.
All right, thank you very much. Canon Peterson, glad you're here today. What are your thoughts, please?
I'm absolutely fascinated that Melissa Bernstein would make this observation. And she writes why she did, and I want to share that with you because I'm sure that this would be helpful in understanding this conversation that we are having today. She describes herself as an observant Jew. And an observant Jew lives their life according to Jewish law and follows the norms and customs of the specific Jewish community to which he or she is associated. The laws are already set out. Why Melissa is proposing this is that she wants many Americans to come to Jesus. And her reason is because the Jewish religion is not a proselytizing religion. And because most Americans have Christian roots in some place, she is hoping that the knowns and other people who have fallen away from the church will come back to their familiar faith to be able to respond to this issue that you've already been discussing. And so I think that it's very important that she's certainly would call for the Jewish community also to go back to the roots of the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, etc. But she's also challenging the Christian community as well. And I dare say she would challenge the Muslim community as well as the Hindu and Buddhist community as well. Today, we are facing enormous social and economic problems. For example, poverty and despair that so many people are facing. Young people who have fallen away from the church are certainly in need to come back to the church simply because of the different social problems, and they feel the whole sense of loneliness and is a real severe problem. I want to, however, just very briefly mention the National Prayer Breakfast that happened on February 6th this year, when conservative author Arthur Brooks was the main speaker at that. And his point was exactly what Andrea has pointed out. The same Jesus who taught us to love God and taught us to love each other, today there's a crisis there because of the contempt and polarization that we are facing in this nation, in our societies, and to be able to return to the God who indeed taught us to love and care for each other.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Mathews, your comments, please.
Yeah, I too think this is incredible. An observant Jew writing about here's why I want more Americans to come to Jesus. I think that alone is just fascinating. When I read the article and focused on question number 3, would America benefit from a national Christian spiritual revival? I said, wow, yes, indeed. And I got to thinking about the First Great Awakening in the 1730s and 40s, and then, of course, the Second Great Awakening with all of its dynamic preachers, the Welsh Revival, the Azusa Revival, 1906. One common denominator all of these great awakenings and these national revivals had was a personal belief in Jesus Christ. I feel I ache for the nuns, the NONES. I pray with great passion for this population group. I'm praying that these people will understand that Christ is the answer. And I think that because of the church's some of the scars that we've left on people's lives and some of our lifestyles and just some of the hypocrisy that we see in churches, it has kind of alienated a lot of people from the church. But Jesus is our perfect Redeemer, and Christ is the one who can make a change in people's lives. I like what Mel mentioned earlier, that it's important to obey Christ. We have to accept him, but when we obey him and implement his principles throughout humanity, I think a bigger change can take place. But yes, I pray for revival, and however he wants to do it, bring it on.
Thank you very much. Dr. Trovall, your thoughts, please.
I'm going to go a little different angle because I understand using Jesus as a fuel to get us to be more moral people. I mean, Christ does that. It's compelling about him because of his life. And so I think that there is something there, and I don't really disagree. But I guess as a Lutheran, my fundamental problem is that I screw up every day. I'm sorry for using that word. I mess up every day.
Theological term.
And I just am racked by guilt because I can't live up to the expectations that Jesus lays out. And I think people stay away from church because it's just judgment, judgment, judgment. You need to do better, do better, do better. You know, to me, what's the power of Christ is that he forgives me, that he releases me from my own guilt and my own judgment and God's judgment of me and other people's judgment of me. And I feel that some of the despair that's being expressed in drugs and in the suicide is because people can't live with themselves because they hear judgment all the time. And we moralize and we moralize. I think the power of Christ is his forgiveness. That this is why, if anything, we need Christ, is not because it makes us better people, but because we need to be healed spiritually. And I think it's from that healing that a changed life happens. It doesn't go the other way around. It doesn't go change life to healing. It goes healing to change life. And so I guess that's my angle on this.
All right, thank you.
Good Lutheran.
Thank you very much.
Reverend Plumbley.
Yeah, I think the problem is different than that. I think the problem is that there are just tons of people that don't believe that there's anything else out there, that there's nothing beyond, and therefore when things are not going well here, when I'm bullied or when I'm beaten down or when I'm kept from, when I see no future that's going to take me in the direction that American culture tells me in 1,000 different ways every day that I must go in order to be a good person, then I give up. There's no place to go, and I wallow in despondency, or I choose suicide, or I choose to just get lost in some drug-induced stupor. And I think whether we talk about it from a Christian's perspective and talk about the need for Jesus, or whether, as Canon Peterson said, we talk about it from the perspective of other faith communities, we do need to have a time where we get back to that understanding that no, there is this deeper something, this deeper someone who is both deep within us and far beyond us, that draws us out of this anomie, out of this understanding that there is nothing besides us, and that there is some place for me to go, something for me to do, something for me to aspire to.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Luxton, you indicated you want to say a further comment.
Yeah, I think that part of the issue that we're facing is that as there's this move away from a natural communities of faith that people kind of grew up in, is the language of faith, the understanding of what that is, was also going with it. So I think we're getting more and more of a gulf that's beginning to develop between communities of faith and those that are the nuns. All right. The language is not there. The basic philosophical frame is not there. And when that is missing, it is extremely difficult just to come in with a solution, right? Because we're talking past each other. And I think that really is one of the greatest challenges we have to face, is how do we create a community where the language is still there, the understanding is still there, so we can actually communicate at a level that gets response. And I think that is a challenge. And the loneliness, the anxiety we're seeing in the current culture is unfortunately not isolated from those of faith. It is something deeper than just
So this is not a superficial thing. Obviously, the roots of this go very deep.
They do. They absolutely do.
And you're describing that the roots need to be addressed at the very basic level.
Right. No, I'm not saying that there can't be a revival like that. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying God can't bring a revival. I don't believe that. But I'm saying that the roots are extremely complex and getting more and more difficult for us to respond to in an easy way.
Okay, Canon Peterson, and then if we have time, Reverend Plumbley.
Yes, indeed. I mean, what you're saying is that humans are social creatures.
Right.
And how does one then build positive and nurture positive relationships? And how is this being done today when there is such a huge gulf? And I think that is a critical issue. And how can the church, how can the synagogue, how can the mosque, the temple, how can we respond to that gulf?
Reverend Plumbley.
I would just simply say we've been here before.
Mm-hmm.
We've done this before. That's where the other great awakenings happened. That's where the Jesus movement of the '60s came out of these same sorts of complexities, this growing confusion in our lives, and they were each in their own way expressions of no, we can have hope. We can have faith that there is something and someone beyond.
One of the challenges, as I see, and I'm kind of hearing it coming through, we consume our history so quickly we can't really savor the moments that are really meaningful. In that society moves so fast, it's always, what is the next big thing? And I think that's getting back to what I'm hearing concerning getting to the basics of relationship building. And when you don't have time for that, it's always the next thing, and you miss the whole point.
Well,
Reverend Plumbley.
And you got to be able to slow down and look at the mountain. You got to be able to slow down and listen to the water in the river as it flows by. You've got to be able to slow down and take a moment to just just simply take in the waves of the sea as they crash upon the shore.
Be still and know that I am God is what the Old Testament, that's what comes to mind here. Well,
Yes.
thank you. That's all the time we have for this segment. We're going to come back in just a few moments for the summations. Before that, there's an important announcement I'd like for you to hear.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome back. I do look forward to hearing from you, and you do send cards and letters. We get them from people who view and those who go to the website, and we appreciate the comments, your observations. Agree or disagree, it's fine. Go ahead and send them to us, and that helps us to kind of sharpen what we do here. And as we look forward to future programs, your suggestions are taken into consideration. I'd like to go now to our summation statements. Let's begin with Canon Peterson.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I found your last comments to be extremely helpful, because I do believe that we're facing a crisis of contempt and polarization in this society, which is so quickly to move from one crisis to the next. We don't even get over one crisis before we face the next crisis. And I think you really hit the nail on the head at that point, and thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. Reverend Plumbley.
Thank you. I am firmly in the camp of those who say that God has been made known most real in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. But for the larger society, I think it is acceptable and important for us to say that America needs a consciousness that there is someone greater than any or all of us. And we need a corresponding set of ethics that arise from that. There are many faith groups through whom God works and has been working. And the ethics of those various groups bear stark similarities to each other. We need to grab hold of those, whatever our rootage is, and turn our lives around and turn our life together around.
All right, thank you. Now, Dr. Trovall.
I see the power of moral communities. I mean, I've seen them in all various religions that motivate people to be communally oriented, to love one's neighbor, and those are real critical. And those wisdom traditions are important. And I do think we need more of that in our culture. That said, honestly, if it weren't for forgiveness, I just don't think I'd even be part of the church. I mean, I could be a moral person outside of it. I would find a community that shared deep philosophical understanding. And so for me, I mean, the key for Christianity to me is God coming to me in Christ and forgiving me my sin and releasing me of all this moral burden. And the morality is a response to that release. And I think that's what our culture needs, is to be forgiven. That is, but okay,
All right.
repeated myself.
Thank you, Dr. Trovall. Dr. Mathews.
I like what Carl is talking about, the forgiveness. I try to remind myself and others that we need to look at people from the possibilities that God sees in them and not necessarily their actualities. We see people through the eyeglasses of God. And I think of Zacchaeus when Jesus was going through Jericho, and everybody else in that town saw him as an awful person, where God, Christ our Lord, he saw him as one of the most generous persons around when everybody else saw him as a thief. So we have to look at people from the altitude of God, and I think that will help in people coming to Christ as well.
Thank you. Dr. Luxton.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned Zacchaeus, because when we get down to it, it seems to me that the Bible is full of stories and it's about an individual who relates to Christ or Old Testament with God, and that is what makes a difference. Hebrews 11, just listing all of these individuals who've stood out because of that connection. Maybe one of my most favorite stories of all times is Elijah, runs into the desert. Having seen God's leadership so many times, now everything falls apart. And he's there in despair. And God leads him through 3 days until he's ready and at peace and be still and still enough to actually hear the voice of God. Maybe one of the greatest things we can do in our society to bring them to an understanding of Jesus is just to try and help people stop long enough to allow God's voice to speak and work with them individually.
I just preached on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got some sermon ideas there? Yes.
I just
Thank
preached
you.
on that.
Dr. Robeck.
I was deeply moved by this article, thinking about an Orthodox Jewish woman functioning as a Christian evangelist, in a sense. Not bringing people to Jesus in the sense of for salvific purposes, but for transformed lives. And I think that that's what evangelism does within the Christian church. It brings people to the point of the possibility of a transformed life. It certainly offers forgiveness, okay? Yeah. But all too often in evangelistic churches, such as my own, there is a tendency to talk a lot about sin and to talk down to people who are sinners, which is all of us, who are all in need of forgiveness. Getting a transformed life doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be transformed in the way you act. And I think that's really important to understand, because it then says we need to be much more heavily involved in the discipleship of people. To lift up love apart from justice, I think, is nothing more than feel good. To lift up justice apart from love, I think, is extremely destructive.
All right, thank you. Great discussion today. Thank you for your participation, for being here, and especially thank you for tuning in. What would we be without you? We appreciate your viewership and your support. We look forward to meeting you again next time. And again, if this is your first time, there's no other program like this on television, which I think is a really neat thing to think about. And it's been around for some 67 years almost now. And we want to keep going here for you. So write us, let us know what you think, send us in your ideas about future programs, and we will appreciate your continued support. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall Meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.